This thing, Leitz Elmarit f2.8 180mm lens. It's got problems. What are its problems? Well, the first and most glaringly obvious is this thing. See how that's not square? It's some filter adapter. A Leitz one, number 14165. Now, something really odd's happened to that. It looks like it's cross-threaded, but it's hard to believe someone could get something that cross-threaded. It certainly doesn't want to unscrew, or not by hand, and I strongly suspect that somebody had started installing that adapter, possibly got it one thread or so in, so it was located on the lens, and then dropped the lens. And basically I think that the adapter, because it's not flat, that surface is not flat, that adapter's bent. I suspect it's been thumped in, and as a result it's in cockeyed. It's going to be very entertaining getting that out. However, that's not the only issue with this lens. The aperture adjusts reasonably well. It's a bit noisy there, it's a bit scratchy sounding, but it certainly does work. The diaphragm blades do open and close. All of the lens elements have got fungus on them. But that's not all. The focus scale ring, this is very stiff. Now there's some interaction with the diaphragm here which I don't quite understand. You'll see the diaphragm, I can't move that through its entire range there. But when I bring this back closer to the it's the close-up end of the scale, suddenly I can. So there's some interaction between the diaphragm and the focus mechanism. I presume that the lens is so set up, because it focuses down fairly close, I think, this lens. Some ridiculous, yeah, it focuses down to 2 meters or something, which is quite close for a 180mm lens. I suspect that it makes subtle changes to the aperture as the focus scale ring is moved, and that whatever's one of them is causing problems with the other. So that's another issue. So basically it needs a little bit of work. I noticed that you can't really call that click stops, it's sort of grate stops. My first issue is to see if I can get this adapter off the front. If I can get the adapter off the front, perhaps I can take the lens apart, because it's going to need to be almost certainly remove the lens components from the front and from the rear and investigate what's going on here. It looks like that, to me, that rear rattle I can feel there tells me that somebody has probably loosened the screws on the back of this. Possibly they've even been in. They may or may not have lost the detent ball for the aperture settings, and they may or may not have assembled it correctly. My first issue though is this business. I mean, look at the state of that. There must be a 3mm difference from one side to the other. What I'm going to do, first I'm going to try rubber gloves, see if I can unscrew that with rubber gloves. I'm not confident of that, I doubt that's going to work. The next trick I'm going to do is wrap this with some tape and then put a hose clamp on there, a big Jubilee clip. Tighten it to death and see if I can use that. If that doesn't work, my next option, and this is getting pretty serious by the time you're in this deep, is to cover the lens glass completely with some tape so that it's protected, and get a Dremel blade and cut this whole ring out and hopefully peel it out as you would do a damaged filter ring. This is quite a substantial piece of metal, this. It's a two-piece. The outer edge here is where you would open this up, and I think you plonk your glass in there and screw it up tight. It's a Series 8 adapter ring. Yeah, Series 8 adapter ring. Anyway, wish me luck. I'll see if I can get this thing loose. So here I've got this all in place, and I've tried already by hand. I can't get that thing to shift. Next thing is to give this a few thumps and see if that will shift it. Look away. Didn't even look like moving. It's not exactly unscrewing easily. As you can see, I've got the thing off. What was the secret? Well, basically I tried everything. I could not get that thing to unscrew. And the reason it wouldn't unscrew, of course, is because it was sitting in the threads like this. It wasn't following the thread at all. And the answer was to tap the high side down, effectively make it jump the threads to square this thing up, so that the thing was now square with the lens, and then it would screw on. In fact, it probably screws back on there now. It came off. Yeah, look at that. Screws on without a murmur. Not a problem. But that was pretty brutal, and there's a bit of scarring on here from I think that's from the clamp I was using. I think that cut through the tape and made a little scar mark on there, but that's just a filter adapter. It doesn't really detract from the lens itself. So having that off the lens, I can probably now look at cleaning up the lens. First I'm going to clean the outside glass surfaces because they're extremely grubby, and then I'll investigate the rest of the action. Desperate times, eh? This is the filter adapter. I was able to get it separated. This is the piece that you would remove. This is where your filter would go, and then this would screw back in to keep it all in place. Now the thread on this, that was screwed down very, very tight. It's quite a fine thread, of course, and it was right round. You could see that there's a mark there. Now that's a mark that I unfortunately put in it using this. But I couldn't get these two parts to unscrew. So what I did was I put it on a block of wood and used my leather-faced mallet and just tapped, well actually bashed repeatedly at the knurled edge here in the direction, like a stroking action, that would loosen it. And it did shift it. It shifted it quite a bit. It shifted it so that my alignment marks where that damage was, which was right there, they were lined up to start off with, and it had shifted round to about there. But it was still tight. I could not move it. And what I did was I used some of this. I just gave it a spray in case there was something gummy in there. And basically all it, probably any liquid would have done the job. All it did was lubricate the thread, and I could get this apart. Now there is a tight spot in the thread, and I presume it's because both rings are probably not as round as they once were. Well, you saw what state it was in when it was on the lens. But I'm quite confident that I could work that out. When you have fine threads like this that do move but aren't aren't as smooth as you'd like, there's often an answer, and the answer is often that you use a nice coarse metal polish and you put it into those threaded pieces and you work them backwards and forwards, and all it'll do is it'll rub down the high spots. And there's the rough spot, I can feel it right there. It would rub that away. And then you clean things very well with solvent. Make sure there's no abrasive left in there and check the action and see if it's now smooth, and often of course it will be. Sometimes it'll require more work, you've got to do it again. But at the end of the process you clean everything very well indeed, and you've got two components that'll screw into each other nice and smoothly. Is it the ideal way to do it? Well, probably not. I mean, probably in an ideal world everybody would have a magic die nut that was exactly the right size and pitch for the thread they're trying to straighten up, and they would just run that over the top and it would true everything up. But in practice, of course, we haven't got die nuts to do things like that, and even less are we likely to have taps that you could clean up the internal thread with. But yeah, this little thing, this filter adapter, that's back together, that's usable now. It's a little bit grubby. You can see there's an awful lot of wood particles or leather particles in that knurling from the me gently stroking it with great thumps. But no, it's a working component, that would go again. I've still got to deal with this lens. My problem with this lens is I need to get the thing apart. And to get the thing apart, the name ring here, I need to unscrew that. Now I've tried a friction tool, it doesn't want to move it. I don't want to drill holes into that name ring to use a tool, something like a lens spanner, but that would be an option. What I'll try next is I will use the same, I'll put a few drops of solvent around the edge of that, and just a few drops, just in case that's locked in with a bit of lacquer, or if it's just locked in with oils or grease that has now turned into a lacquer, as those things tend to do over time, oxidise and become useless as lubricants. But something in there is probably blocking that up, and it may just be accumulated dust. But I need some way of freeing that ring up so that I can get it to turn with a friction tool, which is just something like this, nice rubber thing. And if I can do that, then underneath that there's a ring with notches in it that I can use a traditional lens spanner on to unscrew, and I can remove the front rings here, expose the front group elements and things, and clean what needs to be cleaned. I mean, quite commonly with lenses like this you see fungus in there, but you may find that effectively what you've got is fungus on the rear surface, fungus on the front surface, fungus on the back, the rear of the front group, and fungus on the front of the rear group. So often you don't have to completely dismantle those two groups into their component pieces, because I'm not sure whether this is, you know, 4 pieces of glass, 5 pieces of glass, or 6 pieces of glass. I just don't know. I haven't got any information on that. But I do know that quite likely I'm only going to have to clean 4 surfaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that fungus problem will go away. Of course, that doesn't solve all my problems. I've got the stiff focus. Some of that's down to the grease in the helical will have just gone sticky and gooey with age. And there's some interaction between the focus mechanism and the diaphragm setting here, which I will only determine once I remove the rear ring here and remove this piece completely. I'll get a better idea of what levers and bits and pieces are going on inside there. It'd be nice if I had some service information for this lens. Unfortunately, I just don't. I'm getting a little deeper into it. I'm going to unscrew the ring from the front of the hood section, and I did that by putting a few drops of solvent in there and repeatedly striking it with the rubber tool to break that thing free. I hope that'll allow me to drop that well away from the lens, and I can look here and see how this is constructed. It's possible that this component here is screwed in. There is a lock screw here which I can see exposed now that I'm able to slide that hood back. I strongly suspect if I remove that screw I may be able to unscrew this whole front piece complete with name ring. That's the next thing I've got to attempt. That screw doesn't want to play the game. Well, I'll work on that. Well, I did get that screw loose enough, and the whole front ring here came unscrewed easily after that. So that was easy, and the name ring was just sitting trapped underneath it. So there was no danger I was going to get the name ring out with a friction tool as I'd first hoped. That screw, that little lock screw there, come on camera, you're going to focus? Not today. What about the inside? Yeah, looking at it from the inside you might see it. Yeah, that's actually sitting there askew. It was not easy to back out, and it was obviously sitting at an angle. So I imagine that that screw was done up tight, and the lens was then, well, we can tell how much force has gone on that lens as people have fought trying to get that front ring, that filter adapter off the front. And I imagine a fair bit of torque's gone on there, and this whole thing has probably been torqued across. So that screw's sitting at a funny angle. I'll have to get the remains of that out, clean that thread up, and or possibly re-tap it and use a different size grub screw when I put it back together. But at least we're a little bit deeper into the lens, and now I'll see what I need to do to get a bit deeper still. You can probably see there's another screw here, a lock screw. This one is not mutilated, and I think that that will probably allow me to unscrew stuff further still. This piece certainly doesn't want to unscrew. I'll undo this retaining ring. You can't see any of that, sorry. I'll undo this retaining ring, see what's below that. I have a lens spanner here, which I think will do the job for me. Not wanting to move. Again, this ring may be locked in just with dust, dirt, old age and oils and so forth. So I'm going to put a drop of this around that ring. Only a drop, because I don't want quantities of solvent running inside the lens, just on the off chance I can't actually get the lens apart, in which case we'd be stuck. something came loose. I'm using a toothpick to spin that ring free. Retaining rings like this are very thin. You don't want to do anything at all to distort or damage them, because it'd be very difficult to get that to screw back in if that was damaged. Alright, that piece is out of the way. I suspect that that glass will fall out now. Yep. So I've got the front element loose. I'll put that carefully to one side and see what else is going on in here. Well, I can see another retaining ring there. And we've loosened this screw here, of course, so it's possible that that retaining ring, the outer one there, that may hold this whole next lens group in place. So that's what I've got to find out. I'll turn those tips around. It's always a bit fraught using these tools. You're using them near glass surfaces. You've got to be very careful not to hit anything. Don't dare hit the glass. All of this would be much easier if lenses were bright metal, or at least white painted, but unfortunately they're always black. It's difficult seeing. And okay, that ring's coming loose very easily. And again, I'll use a toothpick to spin that ring loose. Now I'm doing that so I don't scratch the paint, and I'm not in anywhere near as much likelihood that I would scratch the lens. Okay, so that's that retaining ring. Does that just hold glass in place? It may well do. No, I can feel this unit here loose now. Perhaps my screw here needs to come out further. I'll remove that completely. No, this is obviously attached to something further back, and I'll have to investigate. Well, it looks like that whole lens capsule is one piece and sitting in the mount attached at the rear. So I'm going to put this retaining ring back in loosely so that the glass doesn't fall out unexpectedly, and see what I can find out at the rear of the lens. This retaining ring's not exactly going in easily. That's better. Yeah, just need to run that down so that nothing happens unexpectedly. You can see that this group is moving here, but it goes a long way in, and you can see the rear group moving with it, which means that there'd be a retaining ring at the back here holding that whole piece in, I think. So I've got to open up the back of the lens now and see what I can find out. So with the mount, there are 6 screws here. These were a little bit loose. In fact, they were very, very loose before. I'm just loosening these up. I need to make sure that they're all the same length. If there's one or two in here, or however many that are longer than its mates, I need to make note of which ones they are so that everything goes back in the correct position. They may of course be 6 identical screws. That would make life much easier for me. Right, so those 3 are identical. 4, 5, 6. Okay, they're all identical. No problem with that. Now there's a shield here. I can see it's damaged at that end where this piece has come round. Possibly something's been loose. See if this will lift off. No, we're stopped by this bracket here on the diaphragm setting. So I'll take these screws out of the centre here and see if this cone will lift out. Right, I need to find tweezers. There they are. Very short, those black screws. This conical piece lift out. It's trapped by this thing again. Swing that across so I can get that out now. It means I can see in here a little bit better. The mount will now lift off. And the ball, I mentioned earlier that there should be a ball in here for a detent for our stops. Well, there's our detent positions there. Come on camera, keep up. There's our detents. But there's no ball. There's the spring for the ball, but there's no ball. So those screws were loose when I started. I did think that possibly someone had been in and been playing with stuff, and that would appear to be the case. That someone has been in, and in doing so they have lost that ball. That's alright, I can probably find another ball bearing to do that job. That's a very tiny one. Now, this ring couples to the aperture setting on the lens itself. How's it held in here? Does this ring lift off? It may do. Let's lift this off. There's no detents or anything in that piece. Oh, there's a screw at the side here. That's how it couples to that piece. There's a screw on both sides, here and here. Alright, so that's how those couple to it. So I'm just going to make a little mark across there so I know where we are. Remove those 2 screws. This piece will now lift out. And we can see down into the lens itself. And what I'm looking for now in here is to see what it is that's stopping this lens from being able to pull straight out of the tube. It may be this shroud on the back here. I'll let you know as soon as I know. That shield from around the rear lens group came out. I had to put some solvent down the side. I just dribbled a few drops of acetone down there and then that just pretty much came out with my fingers, no problem at all. So it's got a nice neat number of 30 scratched on the side of that with a sharp tool, hand marked for some reason or another, but that doesn't get me all the way in, so more investigation needed. Well, I found out the cause of the weirdness with the focus in the aperture. You'll see that there's a rod here, straight up and down. I'll roll it around a bit. You see there's another one right here, lying at a funny angle. That's bent over. I don't know why it's bent over, but it began its life looking like its mate. Here you can see that damaged piece. It looks like it's brass, so I should be able to solder that back up. But it's twisted right around. So one screw had torn right out. It'll need a little bit of enthusiastic repair, that one. But I'm still no closer to getting this thing apart. Well, it appears this piece unscrews. So a lot of that fighting for nothing. This should be the whole front group. Yeah. This piece is trapped as before, but of course that's no problem to me now. All I need to do, I think, is remove the rear group. Now I really do want to deal with the focus helical as well. The rear group looks to be possibly even a single element at the back here. That being the case, I can probably clean both sides of that simply by opening the aperture right up and accessing it from here, and likewise accessing it from the back here too. I'll try that first. There's no future in removing things that are going to be difficult if you can deal with them in place.